Welcome, everybody. I'm DACIA HARWOOD, and on behalf of my dedicated team, thank you guys so much for coming out on this ever so slightly chilly Santa Barbara evening. Is everyone warm enough? Okay. I want to just go ahead and welcome and acknowledge our trustees in the audience tonight. I believe we have Sheila Snow and Chris Greco and Warren Miller. I want to give a very special shout out to Marlena Miller, our Woman of the Hour. She, in case you all don't know, is the incredible guest curator of the current exhibition, Borein and His Circle of Friends, and she and her husband Warren are truly the reason that our dream of the book, Ed Borein Etched in the West, became a reality this year. For decades, actually, they've been making our dreams come true. So please, just a round of applause for the Millers. Before I introduce our speaker, I just want to encourage you to please, if you are not already a member, please consider joining. It is the holidays pretty soon, and membership makes a great gift, as does the new book. So if you haven't already thought of that, please go and visit Emily and my wonderful staff at the front desk. I also want to let you know that we will be hosting a membership appreciation event on Wednesday, December 8th, so please mark your calendars. And now, Jeremy Tessmer is the gallery director and curator of vintage American art at Sullivan Goss. He has a special knowledge of the American movement, especially as it occurred on the West Coast. He's been with the firm for almost 20 years, working in every element of the business, including curation, sales, marketing, and exhibition design. He's played a significant role in the gallery's publications, including producing over 19 books and numerous catalogs, including those on local artists Ray Strong and Hank Pitcher. Just a few of the exhibitions he has produced include The Red-Headed Stepchild, The History of Collage and Assemblage in Santa Barbara. I love that title, Jeremy. The Art of Santa Barbara and California Cool. Jeremy is a graduate of UC Santa Barbara, which is actually where he and I met first. If you would all please welcome Jeremy Tessmer.
Good evening. I just want to begin by thanking the Board of Trustees and the staff of the museum for having me here this evening. It is genuinely a great pleasure and an honor. This is the place where I have learned a lot of the things I'm going to tell you tonight, which is an odd thing. Some of the exhibitions that Marlena has curated were hugely important in helping me to understand my adopted community. I've been here 32 years. I will never quite be local, but I'm as local as I'm going to get. I'm here tonight to talk to you about Ed Borein, not myself. And I want to begin with a quote actually, from a friend of mine. This is the quote: "It is the artist's job to make an image of what we look like and who we are, and it is your choice, it is the world's choice as to whether to accept that vision. Finally, who are we?" So this is a very important concept to me. It's why we would have a field like art history and why we would come to a museum like this one and why we would look at all of these images and tell all of these old stories. Does Ed Borein give us an accurate image of who we are as Santa Barbarans? I'm going to say yes. Let's just not bury the lead. Ed Borein arrived in the middle of Santa Barbara's first golden age, which was between 1915 and 1930. I don't know if this is an official idea or just my idea, but I think I can back it up. You'll see here a list of important places and institutions formed in that 15-year period. And it's a very important list. Val Verde, the library, what became the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, but was originally the post office, the El Encanto, the Montecito Country Club, Casa Dorinda, the Santa Barbara School of the Arts, which is hugely important here, the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, the Libero, the Chase Palm Park, the beginning of Old Spanish Days, Fiesta, the Casa del Herrero, the Botanic Garden, the Biltmore, the Montecito Inn. It goes on and on. And so during that time, we also get Thomas Moran. We get the Parshalls, DeWitt and Douglass. We get Carl Oscar Borg. We get Colin Campbell Cooper and Ed Borein. We get Frank Morley Fletcher and a woman named LYLA HARCOFF. So people who are younger than I am will sometimes organize complex thoughts, like the ones we're here to discuss, with word clouds, but I'm too old for real word clouds, so mine are sort of organized. What you'll see here is the idea that this is the place where the West met the world and the world met the West. This is a very important idea to me that defines Santa Barbara. You're going to find a certain amount of European and East Coast influence, very sophisticated, like some of the people who are here this evening. I myself am from the East Coast. And we also find a gateway to share the West with the whole world. And right in the center of this is Ed Borein. So some of the things you're going to see over and over this evening are the missions, the Grand Canyon, the mountains and the sea, the desert, Californios, cowboys, Native Americans. And the things that helped bring these to the world were the railroads, Hollywood, newspapers and magazines. And there are some very interesting city relationships that I think you're going to see over and over. Chicago and Santa Barbara have this absolutely terrific relationship, going back to the founding of modern Santa Barbara and continuing to today. But also San Francisco, also New York, also Philadelphia, London, and Paris. So we are a very small city, but we have always been on the global map. And I think that's important for us to that's an important way for us to tell our own story to each other and to the world. In Byron Price's book, he describes a small but notable art colony when Ed Borein arrives in 1921. Well, when did that start? That started with Henry Chapman Ford in April of 1875. And one of the little interesting facts, did any of you know that we are the second oldest art community in California? We are older than Carmel by about 4 months. But in the Olympics and in this fact, the silver goes to the second place. What's important about Henry Chapman Ford? Well, first of all, he came to us from Chicago, where he founded something called the Chicago School of Design. And in a book I bought right here in the Historical Museum bookstore, I learned that he was also Chicago's first professional landscape painter. Let that sink in for a second. That was our first artist. Excuse me. This is the town when he found it. He completes a full set of renderings of all 21 missions of California. Here we see a painting, and it's a deep view of Santa Barbara. Well, one of the things you'll see over on the left of the image is the lagoon, which no longer exists. You'll see the mission, you'll see TV Hill. Here it is a little larger for you. And so he set up on the corner of Coda and State Street in the old International Order of the Odd Fellows building, right between Stearns Wharf and the Arlington Hotel. He's a very clever man. And almost immediately, he took on Mary Stevens Fish as a pupil, and she went on to become the Southern California's first professional woman artist. But this is what he really became known for. This is one of a series of etchings he did between 1880 and 1882 of the Santa Barbara mission. So he rendered all 21. This was a remarkable feat. He had to get to these places sometimes on foot, sometimes on horseback. And this was a man who had sustained a leg injury in the American Civil War, where he worked as an illustrator. So imagine him limping up and down 600 miles of coastline to give us our missions. He sold these to great effect in this beautiful, there were 50 sets bound as you see here. I was lucky enough in my career to handle one of them with gold foil stamped writing. And he took these to the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, the World Columbian Exposition. Here's one of the more fun images I found in my journey to learn this subject. This was the California building at the Chicago World's Fair, and if all of you will look to the far left, it's a very familiar sight. So it would be hard to explain exactly how important the Chicago World's Fair was in the development of the United States. So already, the local artist and our local town are having an outsized impact on how America would see California itself. And here's one of his lovely landscape paintings. So he doesn't get talked about a lot because eventually he retires to Carpinteria, and he's a very important artist here in the museum, and there are lots and lots of very lovely examples inside the museum that I saw on my way here. But probably an artist who will be more familiar is Alexander Harmer. He studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. He arrived sometime in the 1890s and married into a local Californio family. With him, you're going to get Californios, you're going to get newspapers and magazines. This was a painting I handled at the very outset of my career, and it's about the gold rush. Beyond these infinities lies gold. But his great contribution is certainly the preservation of accurate details of Californio culture. He was terrific at multi-figure compositions. So this is the painting, one of the paintings that's showing in the exhibition that Marlena curated. This is another painting that shows the rituals and the ambiance of life in Santa Barbara. So I believe this might be Casa de la Guerra, I'm not positive, but certainly this painting is. And this painting shows his amazing facility with costume, with expression, and here they are choosing by lottery who will be the godparents of a child, which is definitely not how my wife and I did it. But I guess if you have enough faith, you can do it by lottery. The first director of the Santa Barbara School of the Arts is Fernand Lundgren. He arrives in 1906. He's aware of Harmer. Harmer is written about as the first important painter of Southern California, full stop. So who is Fernand Lundgren? Well, I want to encourage the directors and the curators that this town needs a major Lundgren exhibition at this museum. I feel like he's not as well known as he should be. He studies as well at the Pennsylvania Academy. He studies in Paris and London. He becomes good friends with James Abbott McNeill Whistler. And he's also a very important illustrator and painter of the desert and the American Southwest. He paints the Grand Canyon. He's affiliated with the railroads. Here's an illustration he did in Grisaille in New York in 1888. And it's accurate down to the last detail. All of the fashion is hyper accurate, and strangely, Lundgren becomes known as the painter of the night under the electric bulb. Here's one of the pieces in the current exhibition. A lot of the Lundgren estate is out at UCSB. And if any of you are curious, they have a huge amount of the images online. I really recommend you go check them out. Here's an image of Los Angeles lit up by neon. But for me, the best pictures are the pictures of the desert. I think he's one of the great desert painters. And Lundgren, I should say, is not just one of the founders of the Santa Barbara School of the Arts. He's also somebody who brings with him a lot of people who end up becoming important to Santa Barbara art history, among them Albert Herter. And he fully makes the transition. He's both worldly and local. The next painter to arrive is Lockwood de Forest, who arrived in 1902. He came with the railroad. The railroad is one of the most important parts of the development of our community, starting with the Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe Railroad and concluding with the Southern Pacific Railroad. Here he is in 1873. He would have been 23 years old, and he's painting a classic East Coast, second-generation Hudson River School landscape. Everything is tight and well rendered, but eventually, thanks to his uncle, he has a chance to go to the Middle East. And this is actually painted on the Nile, and it's where Lockwood de Forest fell in love with the desert. I should tell you a little bit about Lockwood de Forest. This is a guy who, of course, his son becomes a landscape architect and becomes very famous in our community, but he is connected with almost everybody who's important in his generation. He's in business with Louis Comfort Tiffany. He's a student of Frederick Church. He does interior design for all of the bigs, Mark Twain, the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts. He starts wintering here in Santa Barbara in 1902. This is the earliest painting I have, I've ever seen, and it's dated to the day, December 20th, 1902. I know from other pictures that this is Santa Barbara, but you wouldn't be sure to look at it, would you? The light's not quite right. He's still an East Coast painter, but I think this is maybe Mission Creek. Eventually, because he's such a New York blue blood, he begins to show paintings of the West to the East Coast. This is an exhibition canvas of Palm Springs and Indio. He was able to get out there on the railroad, and he fell in love with it because it reminded him of the Holy Land. And here he is painting the Grand Canyon in an exhibition canvas. So the Grand Canyon shows up again and again and again as an icon of the West. Here you see him beginning to learn how to paint our local colors and our local light. And I'm pretty sure he learned how to do this from the next artist, John Marshall Gamble. So Gamble also comes from San Francisco. He's also trained in Paris. And basically, once San Francisco burns down, he decides to head south. And he really becomes the first national reputation artist for the plein air school in Santa Barbara. So look at this painting and look at the colors. Orange, Gamble green, and then we go back and we can see influence, which I think is really important. This is that small but notable art colony. Back east, they actually could not believe that these pictures were not made up. The phrase Gamble's wildfires was used. And the poppies and lupin were thought to be completely exaggerated, but of course all of us know that that's completely real. The next person to arrive is Albert Herter. I'm not exactly sure when Albert Herter arrives. He certainly starts to come around 1904, and I'm not sure when he starts to spend regular winters here, but that's his pattern. He has a home on Long Island called the Creeks, a very famous place back there, and he had a series of places here in Santa Barbara, one of which I lived in. So I used to live in Albert Herter's studio at 114 Chapala Street. He came from enormous money, and this is where the money comes from. His father was the high-end interior designer of New York. This is a piece from the Met made for the Vanderbilts. And this is what they call the aesthetic movement, art for art's sake. The phrase gilding the lily is perfectly appropriate. So everything is carved, everything is joined, everything is painted and incised. It is decoration on top of decoration on top of decoration. And it's a very sophisticated form of art with which Whistler, in fact, is associated. When Herter gets to town, he becomes part of the faculty at the Santa Barbara School of the Arts. He also has a big tapestry building business. These are two paintings that are in the lobby of the Santa Barbara Public Library. And one of the things I found interesting in researching this talk is There is a 3,000-word Wikipedia page on Albert Herter. And every mural is mentioned except these two murals in the lobby of the Santa Barbara Public Library, both of which celebrate the history of publishing and writing. So one of the things that I'm really hoping is that at some point that historical record gets corrected. What is he better known for? Well, he's the great sophisticate. He's really bringing us European taste. This little painting has, if you go inside, you'll see that little beautiful carved jade green box in the lower right-hand corner. And this is basically a taste for what we'll call Japanism or chinoiserie. It's an Orientalist taste. Of course, his mother built El Mirasol. Some of you will know that story, which became Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden. Here's his most famous mural. Have any of you seen this? This is a huge mural at the Gare de l'Est, the Eastern train station in Paris, and it is a commemoration of World War I. It's called The Departure of the Infantrymen, 1914, so all the young soldiers are getting on the train. He made it on commission. In the middle is his son, Everett. Everett was killed in action. At the far left of the picture is Albert Herter's wife, Adele, and she is looking down and sad. And at the far right is Albert. It's a self-portrait. So this is some of the people who were here before Ed Borein gets here. William Louis Otte is such a fascinating character because he was a stockbroker and thought, I don't want to just deal with money, I'd like to make paintings. And he comes out here because of the stellar art market. In 1913, Santa Barbara had a stellar art market. I mean, a person would leave New York to come to Santa Barbara for the stellar art market. It's kind of hard to believe. Anyway, he was a wonderful artist in the plein air tradition. And this is a painting I found called My Studio Window. And online, it lists his address as 1300 Los Albertos. But one of the fun things is that I met Sheila Lodge, and she knew all about William Louis Otte because she remembers him as her neighbor. Sheila's 91, and William Louis Otte was still alive when she got the house. So here we see, looking back down from the back of Las Alturas, back into that little canyon before the rise of the mountains, and there's just apparently nothing there. And the local example, and this is why the plein air impressionist school became heavily associated with California. Podchernikoff, who's also in this exhibition, was also invited down by some art dealer, and I really wish we knew the name of that person. Who was the art dealer who invited Podchernikoff to come to Santa Barbara? He was a Russian painter who went to San Francisco, the only art scene older than ours, and he was great at combining both Impressionist ideas and the Barbizon ideas. The Barbizon school, for all of you who don't have an art history degree, comes out just before the Impressionists, and it's the first outdoor plein air school. So oil paint in a tube takes artists out of the studio and puts them into the forest. And these are heavily romantic artists, and they make very brushy, very moody, very evocative paintings. This is a Southern California painting. Here's a more typical Barbizon painting. The woman has even got a little shock of red, which is a classic Barbizon touch. In case you know the names, Corot is a Barbizon artist, as is Millet, as is Daubigny. These were the most popular paintings to buy for wealthy people in America between about 1880 and 1900, when Impressionism took over as the big market. And finally, we get to Thomas Moran. Thomas Moran is probably one of the top 5 artists of the United States in the 19th century. And him moving to Santa Barbara almost certainly has a lot to do with his knowledge of our place's importance because of the railroads. So how did this guy get known? Well, he was basically self-taught. He was making illustrations in Philadelphia, and he fell in love with Turner, the British artist Turner. So eventually, when he got some money, he went to London, and he went and made a pilgrimage to all the sites that Turner painted. And somehow, he learned to put together one of the most complicated kinds of painting in the history of art. He became famous initially for paintings of the West. He was one of the artists who got to go on the Yellowstone expedition to record Yellowstone National Park. And it is written about that when Congress saw his color images of Yellowstone, that was the thing that forced them to make it the first national park of the United States. Eventually, in the same year, he makes it out to make this painting, The Chasm of the Colorado. Today, it's in the Senate building in Washington, D.C. The fame of the Grand Canyon and Moran's career can't be overstated. And in fact, the ATCHISON Topeka Santa Fe Railroad decided that it would be a good idea to have color lithographs made of his images of the Grand Canyon and to put them all over the United States to get people to come on the railroad and come out west. And there's a very interesting book that says that the railroad then developed hotels, and a lot of the West was developed with their money. And so here you see a fascinating little map from 1901, and it's the ATCHISON Topeka Santa Fe Railroad map, and it starts in Chicago, and it goes to Los Angeles. So there's a very good reason there is a pipeline from Chicago to Santa Barbara. And here you can see it. This is why I think it's so wonderful and so astute of Marlena to include a printed image by Moran in this exhibition, because Moran's prints, as much of his painting, had so much to do with why people sort of got fired up about the West. Every book title I got for researching this talk had the West as this sort of mythological concept, and I just think that's so fascinating. Anyway, this was a painting he made towards the end of his life. He died in 1926, so he did survive the earthquake, but not by much. It's called Sunset, and what's so fascinating about it to me is you can see in the little box I've made larger, that is the Holy Family. This was the flight into Egypt trope, which had been around since the 16th century in Western art. And he's repurposed it here. They aren't traveling through the Middle East, they're traveling west. They are being delivered to Santa Barbara. Another artist associated with the ATCHISON Topeka is DeWitt Parshall. So he also made images of the Grand Canyon. The ATCHISON Topeka had this genius idea for marketing. What they would do is they would give any artist who was good enough, they would give them free fare out west in exchange for art. And then they would use their art to publicize the railroad. So DeWitt Parshall, who had studied in all the most fashionable places of his era, was compelled to do the same and brought his son Douglas. Here's an image of the Grand Canyon, and it is relatively modern, full of dry brush. It's very abstract. A lot of his images, we would say today, a little bit fuzzy. Here's a painting of his of Casa Dorinda, which I think is just spectacularly beautiful, which would have been one of the new sort of signature locations in the area. And here's the spectacular example in the exhibition. DeWitt Parshall, of course, brings his son Douglas, who is also National Academy of Artist. And Douglas Parshall, I guess there will be people in this audience who well remember him. He was famous for a lot of things. One of them was he was the local poobah of the WPA. So with Douglas Parshall, what you find is images like this. This is, I think, for me, the all-time masterpiece by Douglas Parshall, and it's Adam and Eve as beachgoers. This is a brother and sister, and they were also the models for the original courthouse fountain. you just see this superb modeling, and it's almost got this sort of modern feeling to it. He was very good at this kind of thing. This was an image I got from a previous exhibition here at the museum, and it shows you something new. This will remind you, if you're familiar with the work of Thomas Hart Benton, the elongation of the limbs, the sort of heroic sense of movement, the lionization of American life. Here we have something that briefly came through my hot little hands as a dealer, but ultimately have gone away already. But they were mural studies, so as the local director of the WPA, we have some actual mural studies, and they're in the Western theme. I think that's very profound. It's something to really consider, because mostly Parshall is not known for the West. And so far you've looked at a lot of images that don't necessarily have as much to do with the West. Carl Oscar Borg, though, comes out again with the Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe Railroad. And here's the painting that they own. It's the hermit camp in the Grand Canyon. So that's one of the paintings they got in exchange for a ticket out here. Borg is such an interesting artist to me because he tells so much to me of the story of the West. He basically falls in love with Native American culture as a man from Sweden. And he paints it exhaustively, and Phoebe Hearst pays for him to go and get proper art instruction. This piece, what the museum owns, is, I think, one of the all-time masterpieces by Borg. I don't know how many paintings there are of superior quality. So just in case you aren't sure of what we have in here, we do have legitimate masterpieces, I'm here to tell you. And so this was a man who knew how to ride as well, and was also part of the faculty of the Santa Barbara School of the Arts. I'm sure, in fact we know, that Borein and Borg rode together often and enjoyed each other's company. They both had homes on the Mesa, both built in the Southwest style, so this is a really important relationship. And we begin to see the sort of real assertion of this Western theme and idea. But he could also make a killer California plein air impressionist painting, which I have here. The next person to arrive is Colin Campbell Cooper. Cooper comes out west for the World's Fair in San Francisco, the Panama Pacific International Exposition. So basically they completed the Panama Canal, and the city father said, we need people to come out here now. Let's build a whole city and invite people out here. And they had a big art competition, and Cooper is part of it. Cooper at the time, by the way, is one of the most important painters in the United States. He's probably the leading impressionist painter of architecture. But before he gets all his training, would you believe, he too was interested in the West. This is before he studied in Pennsylvania with Thomas Eakins, and it's a painting from from Colorado. And so this Western theme, which Cooper is not associated with, was an early interest of his. This was a world traveler. This is the Place de l'Opéra in Paris, France. Here's the New York Public Library. This is really where he built his career. Here's the Taj Mahal. This guy was everywhere. He went all around the world before he came to Santa Barbara. And here is the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco. This painting is in the Crocker collection. This is what brought him out here. And it was on his way from one World's Fair in San Francisco to the other in San Diego. San Diego was like, we are also available via the Panama Canal. So they had a follow-up fair in 1916. And he loved Santa Barbara on his way through. When his wife died, he moved here. This is a staggeringly beautiful painting in the exhibition, and I'm so pleased to see it here because this is everything I love about Santa Barbara. Perfect sense of light, perfect sense of color, really charming and intimate. And all of the grandeur of his earlier pictures is replaced by a kind of gentility and sweetness. And Ed Borein. Now, Cooper and Borein know each other from New York, which I think is really interesting. Ed Borein finally arrives. We're halfway through my talk, and Borein's just arriving. He comes from San Francisco, which is the only art community older than ours, so that's very telling to me. And he gets his start with Maynard Dixon and Jimmy Swinnerton. So San Francisco has a place called the Mark Hopkins Institute up on the top of Nob Hill, and that's where he begins to get his training. And these two are devout lovers of the American Southwest, and that's very important for the future of Ed Borein. I shot this morning. This is his studio inside El Paseo. And here's a little bit about who we're dealing with. So Maynard Dixon, for my money, one of the greatest painters in the history of the United States. And certainly the painting that is in this exhibition testifies to how. This is the hero period, which is the later period. He makes these very reductive, they're very realistic, but they also have this great sense of abstract design, and he doesn't put anything in there that you don't need. So whereas Borein is a highly detailed guy, and we get a lot about the saddles and the boots and where you wear your gun and how you tip your hat, what the color of the palomino is, from Dixon we get the sort of sense of light and the drama and grandeur of the West. Jimmy Swinnerton is another of his great influences, and really is very telling because Swinnerton makes a lot of his money drawing for the newspapers, especially Hearst publications. And in fact, he does comics. And so some of his best pictures, including the ones inside the museum, have a sort of great comic book feel. The great collection is at Palm Springs Museum because that's where he wound up. Interestingly enough, he came out west to dry out. He was a big drinker in New York. And somehow he lived to be 99 years old anyway. I guess the drying out worked. I threw this in just for fun and for continuity. Ray Strong, who became one of our community's leading artists as well, was also put on his path by Maynard Dixon and Jimmy Swinnerton, also in San Francisco. And one of the last people to see Maynard Dixon alive was Ray Strong, and this was a painting he painted when he heard on the radio driving back from Maynard's house in Arizona that the great master had died. He pulled over and supposedly made this painting, which is now in the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. It's a very Dixon kind of Strong. So, and then Ray Strong moved back here in 1960. Anyway, we start to have our own homegrown people here. Clarence Mattei of Mattei's Tavern in the Valley. He's one of the 5 children up there, and showed sort of natural facility for drawing. And so he actually made a whole career basically drawing the swells of Santa Barbara, which I think is a remarkable feat. I look at this portrait and I think of James, what was the great quip? Every time I paint a portrait, I lose a friend. That's what Sargent said. I wonder if Thomas Stork liked this. He looks very dignified and very powerful. It's not a flattering portrait, but it's certainly probably a very powerful one. So at this point, the School of the Arts has been established in 1920. Borein is on the faculty, BORG is on the faculty, Herter is on the faculty, Cooper is on the faculty, and they decide to hire a big gun, and they go all the way to the Royal College of Art in Edinburgh, Scotland, to hire Frank Morley Fletcher. It's a remarkable thing to me. And Frank Morley Fletcher takes the job, which is equally remarkable. And he starts a whole very important tradition. I think one of the things, my little pet theories about Santa Barbara is that we always talk about plein air art. I think we should be talking also about Western art, and we should also be talking about printmaking. So whether it's Borein's printmaking or Henry Chapman Ford's printmaking, or the fact that Frank Morley Fletcher set up so many good artists here in town as printmakers of Japanese wood blocks. And so they're really spectacular in that they show the West, but they show them in a very Japanese style. And so here we see the world beating a path to our doorstep. Joe DeYoung is sort of an amazing artist, and is Bill Reynolds in this? I just want to say I loved your book, if you're here, Bill. It was just it was a fabulous read, and I think a very important thing about Ed Borein is you look at his work in the galleries inside, and you're going to see a couple things. One of the things you're going to see is that there are no landscapes that don't have people. I think Ed Borein was really, I mean, he was interested in horses a lot, and he was interested in cattle a lot, but he was really interested in people, and he had this enormous group of people who followed him all around the United States. It seems to me that this is part of how you build a community. It's one person connecting with another, and whether that person is Charlie Russell, or it's Joe DeYoung, or it's Maynard Dixon, or it's Colin Campbell Cooper, they all liked this guy, and they all came to see him. And as a result, our community has had this very, very dense group of people over this period of time who are all significant artists of stature in the United States and in the world who make art. Joe DeYoung, I think what's so great about him is it ties in Hollywood, and that's another part of the Santa Barbara story, whether it's Flying A Studio or the way that artists like Borein and Charlie Russell and Joe DeYoung brought an accurate vision of cowboy life to the world. I'm 45 years old. This was not really part of my generation. My dad, who is 83, this is the end and the beginning of everything in life. He loves all the Westerns. He's seen them all 10 times, where I've seen them all twice. I think people like Joe DeYoung, who's also, a Ranchero Vistadore, an artist of the Rancheros Vistadores, I think this is a really profound story that our community has, where we're taking an aspect of our lives and we're pushing it out to the world. So there's a point at which all of the world comes to Santa Barbara, and then there's a point at which Santa Barbara pushes a certain vision of its own career or culture to the world. And again, for people, my dad's age, it becomes literally an archetype of the US citizen. And to such an extent, of course, that when I was a kid, my dad worked in Reagan's White House. And so there you go, Reagan was one of the Rancheros Vistadores and certainly modeled himself in part on the cowboys that Joe DeYoung told him, this is what you wear, this is how you wear it. So it's a very powerful story to me. As I was walking around El Paseo restaurant this morning, I was looking at all these wonderful paintings, and I was thinking about just how lucky we are that this whole thing came to roost in our community. When I first moved here, I was told, well, Ronald Reagan ate at El Paseo because Will Rogers used to talk here, and Will Rogers used to talk here because Ed Borein used to talk here. I mean, this is only a town of 80-some thousand today. I mean, we're a small place, and yet we punch way above our weight in culture. I hope that's something that you take away from this evening. Yeah, we're a local town, and these are local artists, but these are also artists of the whole United States. I'm going to finish with LYLA HARCOFF. She had a studio in El Paseo, and she chose El Paseo because of Ed Borein. She was also the only woman to work for the WPA in Santa Barbara. And there's a very interesting story. Early in her life, she also took the deal for the ATCHISON Topeka Santa Fe Railroad. She came out and agreed to take a trip west in order to, in exchange for art. And our gallery had the estate of LYLA HARCOFF, and this was a story that was told to me. So the story was told that she got off the train to go to meet the Hopi. And she went and lived with them for months on end, and they took her in, and she made a lot of paintings with them. And when she went back to the train station, which was, by the way, little more than a wood platform, finally the train came back on, and the conductor said, "Ma'am, you're going to have to buy an extra ticket for all of your paintings." And she said, "I don't have the money for an extra ticket." And he said, "Well, then you're going to have to leave the paintings." So she got off the train with her paintings. And the story was told to me that night it snowed. And so we're talking about a very short white woman on a wood train platform in the middle of nowhere in a snowstorm in rural Arizona. This sounds like the most unbelievable story to me, by the way. This is a painting I eventually got to handle of a little Native American boy. Do you know how she survived that night? She built a lean-to out of her paintings. That also sounds unbelievable, but would you believe the back of this canvas was soaked through? There were water stains all over it. Now, this isn't really what she became famous for. She actually went to Paris and she learned about Matisse and Cézanne, and that's actually what she brought to Santa Barbara. And so I love the idea of being able to buy this painting in El Paseo, or being able to buy an etching by at Borein. I love the idea that Frank Tenney Johnson and Clyde Forsyth and all these wonderful artists came through. Charlie Russell came through El Paseo, and they would have seen these things. And so I come back to the beginning of my talk. What do we look like? Who are we? Well, we have a little bit of international taste. We are who LYLA HARCOFF painted us as. And we are as Ed Borein drew us. We are the little western town and the big international city. And with that, I think that's it. That's the end of the talk. So, if I can answer any questions, I would be happy to do that. Any questions?
When are you coming back?
Oh, I'd be happy to come back anytime. I really want to say, by the way, that I really hope that the institution continues to do this shows of this quality. This is, I'm from Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has all the Smithsonian museums, and our tax dollars are really hard at work, I'm sure. Not that those museums were open during much of the last 2 years, but anyway, they have all of the treasures of the world because they have all of the money of the world to buy them. This museum is superb, and I really think it's because of the people here. I really can't stress how thrilled I am and honored that this place has material of this quality, because I guarantee you, places this big elsewhere in the United States do not have this kind of thing. We are really and truly spoiled. So, anyway. All right, cheers.
Jeremy, I just want to say that every time I hear you speak, I fall just a little bit more in love with Santa Barbara and this museum. So thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Marlena. And thank you guys all for coming. Enjoy.